So here we are again. It just seems like the time goes by so fast, man. It's just, I can't believe how quickly time goes by. It seems like we were doing the Halloween teaching just a few months ago. And, you know, it's been a year already. So that just shows you the rapidity with which the Lord will be returning to rapture his church very shortly. So tonight we're going to talk about, we've reached the month of October all over again, which is the fall harvest time. You know, for those of you who grew up on a farm or near a farm, you know, up in Ann Arbor where I grew up, there were a lot of farms all around us and all that stuff. And so we're going to take a look at the satanic roots of the holiday of Halloween and try to, you know, advise one another, and we can inform ourselves as to what Halloween is really all about. And as we educate ourselves, we can help educate others. And you know, there's been some debate in the Christian church whether Christians should celebrate Halloween, and it would be my position that we shouldn't, because you know the verse in the Bible that says that we should have no fellowship in the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. And most people don't understand, as I did growing up in the Midwest in Ann Arbor, Michigan, you know, that Halloween was actually an ancient Druidic Celtic blood sacrifice ritual to pay homage to the green man, or the god of the sky, sometimes, you know, referred to by the term Samhain, or Samhain can be used as an adjective or as a noun, and it basically made reference to the time of the fall in October, when the crops would be harvested for the winter, because the winter was coming, and to ensure the growth of new crops in the springtime, the people would practice, in essence, what some in the occult refer to as sympathetic magic. That is, to do something with the expected result that the spirits of the air would reward you and do your bidding if you did a certain ritual or ceremony to appease them. And some of these rituals and ceremonies actually resulted in human child sacrifice. And we see that none of this is new. There's nothing new under the sun, it says in the book of Ecclesiastes. This really relates all the way back to ancient Babylonian paganism. Not the Neo-Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar, but the ancient Babylon of Nimrod and Semiramis, where in the city of Babylon, the first, you know, world empire, which was established shortly after the flood of Noah destroyed the world, when God had to cleanse the earth of the Nephilim genetic hybrids who had, you know, taken over the population of the planet Earth. God wiped out the planet and started anew with Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. And from those 8 people, everybody that's on earth now eventually came. And shortly after that, the great-grandson of Noah, an individual by the name of Nimrod, established the Tower of Babel, the Babylonian Empire. And the idea behind the Tower of Babel was that since God sent a flood to destroy the world, the next time we're going to build a bulwark against God. We're going to build a tower so high that even if the floods come, that God won't be able to kill us with water. And they were under demonic and Luciferian fallen angel, deception and influence when they did that very thing. And that's part and parcel of the reason why the Tower of Babel was built. They weren't trying to build a tower that goes through outer space past the moon, Mars, the Milky Way galaxy, to the third heaven. What they were trying to do is build a stargate so high that the flood of Noah wouldn't be able to destroy it if it came again, and so that they could be in contact with the spirits of the air, who they thought were gods. They were really fallen angels, but they, in their estimation, thought we're dealing with gods who are going to help us get ahead. And so what Satan did with Nimrod was he influenced him to believe that if you do certain rituals, I'll reward you with power and knowledge that's been hidden from you by the God of heaven. And this is what is called in the occult sympathetic magic, when you do certain things with an agreement that you'll get something in exchange from the spirits who you now have control over. The reality is the spirits have control over you. You're the puppet on the string, you just don't know it. You think that by doing the hexagrammatic, sympathetic ritual that, oh, I got power over the demons, now they have to do my bidding. Really, they're getting power over you by getting you involved in occultic practices that opens the door of your soul to demonic oppression and then eventually possession. And so all of this really started back in ancient Babylon. And we'll look at the historical precedents behind that. But then it really became popularized in the British Isles, Britannia, when the Celts, the Celtic people, came from across the sea and settled in the area of what we now know as the British Isles today. England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland. Those were the places where the castles were built eventually. And it was at that time, prior to the Middle Ages, that the Celtic people reestablished the ancient Babylonian sacrifice of, human blood sacrifice, burning your children to ensure that the crops would grow. And there were, the men of oak were the high priests. And they called themselves the Druids, because in the Celtic that meant men of oak. And so the Celtic Druids were the priests of Druidism. And Druidism required you to sacrifice your children to be able to curry favor with the gods of the heavens. And the gods of the heaven were really fallen angels. And so that's really where Halloween comes from and how it started up. So Steve, you go ahead and open us up in prayer, and then we'll kind of go ahead and look at the historical background behind that.
Lord God, we thank you again for just, a small little meager gathering tonight, Lord, but we thank you for this little house church that we can come together, study the word, Lord, and understand, what it is that's going on in this world, Lord, that, what our job is before your return. Lord, I pray for your soon return. We thank you for your son, Jesus Christ. We thank you for all those tuning in out in the internet land, and Lord, we thank you again for this chance for us to gather, fellowship, and study the word. Lord, in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through a little historical essay of all of the stuff that happened. But before we do that, I'm just going to give you guys, stealing from Kent Hovind School of Teaching, supposedly if you tell people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, they'll remember it better and be able to explain it to other people. So that's the teaching practice that we're going to do. So we're going to look at our outline here.
Tell them what you told them. I like that.
Right? You're going to tell the people in advance what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you this. And then you tell them. And then after you tell them I just told you this. So you kind of do an introduction. You deliver the body of the content. And then you do a summation at the end, basically to summarize what you've been telling them for the last few hours or days. And we used to do this teaching in one night. We started it really back in 2012 down at DRUIDS house down in South Beach, man. We went like from 7 p.m. to 1 in the morning, and and it was actually, I think the first time we did it was actually on Halloween night. And we had our little pumpkins and decorations out there. That was a nice little, had the tiki lamps out there and torches out on the waterfront down in South Beach. So what I'm going to do this time is break it out into a couple of different sessions, so that we're not going to be, having to strain. I know all of you guys are working and hard-working guys and tired and all that stuff. You don't want to go through a 4-hour-long session of the Herbster talking about the satanic roots. So we're going to do part of it now, and then the other part of it when we come back. So what I'm going to tell you about over the course of the next two teachings is the following 13-point, ironically, 13 is a very occultic number, 13-point essay of the satanic roots of Halloween. And it's my position that Halloween isn't just a friendly Midwestern, holiday for children, but that is actually a participation or a liturgical practice that invokes sympathetic magic to allow the demons and the fallen angels, who are the servants of Satan, to obtain power through our worship of them. Not to mention, they obtain incredible amounts of power through human blood sacrifice. It is the battery that makes the satanic engine run, is the death of human beings but particularly of young children who are innocent. That, for whatever reasons, in the metaphysical world, and I've read different, books or papers and theories on, how these fallen angels obtained some type of metaphysical power from the release of the human spirit from the body, and how that when, Satanists and other occultists who actually kill their victims, they actually drink and consume the blood, because, especially with a child, when you terrify them, their adrenal glands will release a chemical called chromolase, and apparently it gives some kind of really incredible, super ultra high, more than any cocaine or heroin or opium-based pharmacological substance. And so what you want to do is, when you're doing these dark rituals, which actually do occur, Albert, on October 31st, all throughout North America and the world, there will be human child sacrifice and adult child sacrifice, or adult sacrifices of human beings, because whether you believe it or not, the people that practice black magic and Satanism and witchcraft, they believe it. And they believe the shedding of blood can cause the invocation of spirits that will release power into their lives to help them get wealthy, help them have success, help their crops to grow. Usually, when we were an agrarian society, we wanted our crops to grow. Now people want to become the vice president or the president of the company. They want to get into an Ivy League institution. They want all these things that normally they might not be able to obtain on their own. So what they're willing to do is make a deal with the devil to obtain something that they normally might not obtain on their own. And that's the bargaining chip that Satan has used from the very beginning. And where did he use it first?
Garden of Eden.
Garden of Eden, in Genesis chapter 3. It's funny, I was listening to Kid Holden the other night to give a lecture, and he was kind of making fun of women, and how he's like, I found some bones, in the ground, and it proves that there is no missing link, there's no Neanderthal man, because you can look at the bones and tell that, and this isn't 3 billion years old, whatever. It says, and if you're really an astute person and an expert, you can tell by looking at the bones what gender it is. And they were like, well, how do you do that? He said, okay, you see these bones here? They're pointed towards the mall. That means it was a woman, and here's the skull we found in the dirt. You can tell this one. You see the jaw joint is more worn down, because women love to talk, and so he laughed and all that stuff. And somebody in the audience said, where would you men be without us women? And his response was, Garden of Eden, so that actually, you got to laugh. Love the ladies. To all my ladies out there, we love you. We wouldn't want to live without you. We could do it. We'd be in the Garden of Eden, but we'd be lonely. I wouldn't want to spend all day in the Garden of Eden with Steve or Albert, as much as I like them. I'd rather have Eve running around somewhere, But yeah, so that was kind of funny. But no. So what we find out then is that Halloween is really just a modern day iteration of ancient Babylonian paganism, which had its start in the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 and 16. Albert, you can flip over there and we can just read that just to get the ball rolling, and we can kind of see how all of this really began. It's amazing how the Bible links one to another, and how, even all the way back into Genesis, we find out that it relates to stuff that's going on right today, even as we approach Halloween, the most high and powerful occultic day of the year, relates back to Genesis chapter 3. Why don't you read for us the Genesis chapter 1 right through 15. Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 15.
The fall of man, chapter 3. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the tree of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat.
Okay, stop right there. Okay, and so what do we have? What we have is a situation where Eve, in essence, became the very first Wiccan high priestess. She became the first goddess because what Satan was offering her in the form of the serpent, he was offering her the opportunity to become the first goddess if she disobeyed God. Satan called God a liar. At first she was like, well, God said, no, we shouldn't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is another way of saying the occult tree. Occult means hidden knowledge. God wanted to hide knowledge of evil from Adam and Eve so that they can maintain their purity and their innocence. But, unfortunately, Satan had convinced her that God has given you the short end of the stick. If you obtain occultic hidden knowledge, you can evolve into godhood. You'll be the first goddess, and you can ascend past Adam. And that's where the theory of evolution came from, right there in Genesis chapter 3, that we can evolve and get better and better and better over time. We can become a god. That whole lie started in Genesis chapter 3. Eve believed it, and part of what she was required to do was to get her husband to eat of it as well, and that's what she did. Satan didn't deceive Adam. Satan deceived Eve, and Eve seduced Adam into doing or eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which caused the downfall of the entire human race. So we see that all of this really began in Genesis. And what we'll look at in our outline, we'll see that the very first Wiccan, or witch, the two mean the same thing in essence. A Wiccan is the one who practices witchcraft, a wise one. That's what they call themselves, wise ones. They don't think of themselves as ugly old hags on a broomstick with a pointed hat. They think of themselves as primarily women who are pursuing hidden occultic knowledge to open doors to supernatural power that will allow them to ascend into godhood or goddesshood. So we see the fall in the Garden of Eden occurs at about 4000 BC when Eve becomes the very first Wiccan goddess. She became the first person, who happened to be a woman by the way, who obtained or pursued godhood through occultic knowledge. That's what Freemasonry is, that's what witchcraft is, that's what Wicca is, that's what people who participate in black magic and white magic and syncretistic, sympathetic magic, all of that relates to evolving into the form of a god by using knowledge that the God of the universe wanted to hide from Adam and Eve. Not because he was cruel or unloving or a male chauvinist pig, but because he didn't want Adam and Eve to lose their innocence by coming into contact with the knowledge of evil. And so, about 6,000 years ago, at about 4000 BC, that's when that first occurs in the garden. That's where the Satanic Roots of Halloween really has its origin, was Genesis. And then secondly, in 2400 BC, you fast forward about 1600 years later, after the flood of Noah, what do we get? In about 2400 BC, we have Nimrod and Semiramis establishing a new occultic religion, which collectively in the Word of God is referred to as Mystery Babylon. We see that referred to in the book of Revelation. And that is the formalization, the liturgical establishment of a practice of religion whereby if you do certain things such as human sacrifice as a sacrament, then in the fall you can harvest a great yield. In other words, you can appease the gods of the world, who are really the fallen angels in disguise, by doing certain rituals, including sexual perversions. That's where your homosexual rituals really got their start. Orgies, killing your children, things of that nature was offered to the people as a form of appeasing the gods of the air who make the crops grow and who make Babylon, prosper. And after God destroyed the Tower of Babel and scattered the nations, they still tried to unite together. Nimrod was responsible for establishing the first major city-states in the New World post-flood, including Babylon, including Uruk and Akkad. The Akkadians can mark their establishment to the efforts of Nimrod, who was a nation builder, a world empire builder, the world's first one world emperor, a forerunner of the Antichrist. But eventually, after the Tower of Babel fell, the Babylonian system of worship fell into disrepair when, as we talked about in Mystery Babylon, we gave a teaching on that not too long ago, and it's been a little while, we'll probably look at it again soon. But we found out that eventually Nimrod, according to tradition, was killed by one of the sons of Noah, who was outraged at the human blood sacrifice and the child sacrifice that was going on in Babylon, and he was put to death. And there are other stories that suggest that his wife had something to do with it because Semiramis wanted the throne. But eventually their child Tammuz became a type of the unholy trinity. God the Father was mimicked by Nimrod, who became the sun god. He supposedly died and was resurrected as the sun god king of Babylon. And Semiramis was the virgin who gave birth to the son Tammuz, because she supposedly was impregnated by a beam of sunlight that came down from heaven from her now resurrected husband, Nimrod, who became the sun god, who impregnates her. She gives birth to a child, a virgin-born God-man, which is a type of perversion of the incarnation of Jesus Christ. Only this child is Tammuz, a type or forerunner of the Antichrist. In ancient Egypt, they were referred to as Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And so we see that archetype of those three unholy trinity repeating itself. But we see that the Nimrod worship resulted in the Mystery Babylon, which was the formalization of the worship of Satan through rituals including sexual perversions and sacrificing your children to the gods of the air. And it became eventually a fall harvest. At about 2300 BC, go fast forward a century or so, from about 2300 to 2000 BC, the Celts, who were the forebears of the Aryans, an Indo-European group of people, moved from where they began across the landmass into what is now the British Isles or Britannia, and became the forerunners of the Scotch Gaelic religion of Druidism. The Fall Harvest Festival was in the Scotch Gaelic language of the Kelts, referred to as SAH WEEN, spelled S-A-M-H-A-I-N. Sometimes you'll see it here mispronounced Samhain, but it's SAH WEEN. And it's during this Fall Harvest Festival cycle that on October 31st, people dressed as demons, went door to door, gathering food, meals, and the giving of sweets and candy, and the practice of what was known as the Wicker Man began in earnest in the British Isles during the Celtic Fall Harvest Festival cycle on October 31st, referred to as SAH WEEN. And that required the people to gather together the best of the crops, goats, pigs, animals, and in some cases human beings, and place them in a giant wicker effigy of a man and set it on fire on Halloween. And there were also bonfires in the ancient Celtic language, which eventually became known as bonfires. And the bonfires eventually became part of the tradition of Samhain, which eventually became part of the tradition of Halloween. And so these bonfires were called such because they would throw animals into a big fire, and in some cases human beings as well, to appease the sky god, the god of the sun. Remember, it's really Satan disguising himself as the reincarnated Nimrod. Nimrod, supposedly after he died, came back to life again as the sun, and it's the sun that gives sunlight and warmth to the crops and makes the crops grow. And when the crops grow, people get to eat and they get to live. And so they will build these bonfires and burn them during the night on October 31st to signal the end of the fall harvest and the approach of winter, which meant death of the crops, death of nature, and to try to give power to the sun, which they believed was a god, through burning a fire. And what kind of a god needs a bonfire to keep them warm, right? Not much of a god. But people believing, having itching ears, the Bible says, they raise up for themselves, teachers will teach them the things that they want to hear. And so the people wanted to believe that if we do certain rituals, we can get supernatural benevolence and privileges and gifts from the heavens. And if the gods of the heavens tell us to kill our children, so be it. And that's exactly what happened. So we see that we go forward from the Fall Harvest Festival, we got the Wicker Man, the bonfires, to appease Satan is manifesting himself as the horned god of death. The Druids recognized the former sun god as the god who was in charge of death. And he had horns, interestingly enough, and that's why there's that, sort of mythological image of Satan with horns on his head. The horned god is always associated with Satan, the devil. And, the individuals who would be put in the Wicker Man and would scream as they're being burned to death, these screams would be interpreted by the Druids. And they'd say, oh, see that here, that scream? That scream proves that your crops, Farmer Jones, are going to grow 3 times more than last time. And that little baby right there who's being, has her flesh cooked off her bones, well, her screams are saying that there's going to be a harvest of plenty for the Johnson residents this coming springtime. And so the people believe, hey, good things are happening as a result of that. And so we'll go through all of that, and we'll look at also how the demon-carved hollow turnip with a candle in it became what in American tradition now is called the jack-o'-lantern, which is a carved out pumpkin with a face on it and a candle inside. That started out as a turnip gourd in ancient Ireland. And so we'll look at that. Historically speaking, as we go fast forward from the early to late 2000s BC, before Christ, so 2,000 years before Jesus, to a time of probably just a few years after Jesus, when the Roman Empire defeats the Celtic people in the Gallic Wars, basically fought in the area of what's modern day France, then called Gaul. Rome, as they are conquering the Gallic people, see that this practice of Druidism is still going on, and they are horrified by it. Even the tough as nails, iron-booted Roman Empire was offended by what they saw as being barbarism. These people sacrificed their children to gods and fires, and so the Roman Empire outlawed Druidism and said the Druid priests could be put to death, which forced Druidism to go underground as a secret religion. And that's when Mystery Babylon took on this mysterious cloak of invisibility. In ancient Babylon, the Babylonian paganism could be practiced openly because the emperor and his wife promoted it. But now that the Roman Empire has taken over and said, look, you can worship whatever god you want to, as long as you recognize the Caesar as God, then you can have other gods too. But you can't be burning your kids to death and all that. That's crazy. And so Druidism went underground because of oppression by the Roman Empire. And then, not too long after that, from 47 AD to about 300 AD, Druidism was secretly syncretized into Roman paganism. So Druidism became Pomona goddess worship. Druidism bubbled to the surface because Rome was always a pagan state anyway, with the worship of all kinds of foreign gods. The Greek gods of the ancient Greek Empire were adopted into the Roman culture and given Latin names, so that Zeus became Jupiter and things of that nature. And so Pomona became the goddess of worship. And some of the ways that you would worship this Pomona goddess, who was really Semiramis by any other name, would be bobbing for apples, but the bobbing for apples required a person to stick their face into a vat of boiling oil to grab an apple. Either that or put to death. If you drew the lot for human blood sacrifice for that year, you were given a chance to save your life by agreeing to go into the bobbing for apple routine. But that bobbing for apple was, floating in a vat of boiling oil. So you would burn your face off while you're trying to save your life. So even if you lived, you'd be horribly disfigured forever. So it just shows you the torturous, satanic rituals that Satan has instituted and introduced into the cultures of the world. Why? Because at the end of the day, Satan hates the human race. Why? Because we are created in the image of God, and our destiny is to do what?
Reign and rule with Jesus.
Reign and rule with Jesus forever, Albert. That's our destiny. And Satan knows that, and he doesn't want to be reigned and ruled over by this little puny insect called the man. And so he set about in the Garden of Eden to destroy our relationship with the Lord by seducing the woman, and has set about since that time to torture human beings because he hates them so, which is why the killing of human beings, and that's why you have all these wars, and people talk about the, Illuminati has all of these wars and institutes wars and things of that nature, and you figure, you look out throughout history and you see that, World War II killed more people than it did in World War I, and it didn't solve anything. And then after that, you had the Korean War, and shortly after the Korean War, you had the Vietnam War, and it always seems to be one war after another. Why don't these wars ever bring peace? Because they aren't really meant to bring peace. Only when Jesus returns to the earth will there be a long-term, lasting, permanent peace. And what Satan does is manipulates the governments of the world to continually be at odds with one another so that the warfare can continue onward over and over and over again. And so we see that then part of the Roman pagan situation, or the Roman pagan empire, which would result in goddess worship, the worship of all of the Greek pantheon of gods who became the Roman pantheon of God, the worship of Caesar as a god. All of those things eventually resulted in a permissiveness in the culture of the Roman Empire. And that permissiveness in the Roman Empire's culture resulted in what? In Druidism, which was forced underground by the edicts of Caesar, and that human blood sacrifices would not be tolerated. How are you guys doing? Come on in. Welcome. So what we find out then is that ancient demonic Druidism syncretized itself in through the back door into the Roman culture. And so we have a bunch of traditions that the Roman Empire allowed, even though they outlawed Druidism when they originally won the Gallic War. And so we get to our sixth point in our outline. In about 325 AD, what happens? The Roman Catholic Church now gets its real official beginning, because in 325 AD, a very important event occurred. The emperor of Rome at the time, Caesar, was a guy by the name of Constantine. And Constantine says that he saw a sign in the heavens, and he said he saw a red cross. It wasn't the small T type cross, it was a plus shaped cross, which has always been an ancient occultic rune or symbol. Supposedly, the emperor of Rome, Constantine, saw this image of the cross in the sky and said he heard a voice from heaven that said, "Under this sign conquer." And so as a result of that, he then signed the Edicts of Toleration, because at that time in the Roman Empire, if you were a Christian, what would they do? They would take you and throw you to the lions. Men, women, and children were taken, just like you guys. They would take the whole family right here, and they give you an opportunity to renounce Christ. Do you renounce Jesus as your God? And if you said no, which they all did, they'd be taken to the Roman Coliseum, just like, you go to see Miami Dolphins play at Dolphin Stadium on Sunday. You'd go to the Roman Coliseum to see the next batch of Christians sacrificed to the lions, as kind of a sport for the Roman state. And so each one of you will be given the choice. You can either renounce Christ and accept the gods of pagan Rome, Jupiter and Zeus and Venus and Aphrodite and all these things, and acknowledge the emperor as God, or if you insist that Jesus is God, you're going to be thrown to the lions and killed. And so you'll be forced to make a decision. And the shocking thing is that all of these families in Rome, the men, the women, and even the children, would willingly and happily go to their graves, a bloody, horrible, terrible death, being torn to bits, disarticulated, dismembered by lions and tigers and bears, who were intentionally starved by the Roman centurions so that they would be ravenous, so they would tear to pieces the first thing that they saw. And so that's what was going on in Rome in about 300 AD. But in 325 AD, guess what happens? Satan realizes that I've been killing Christians in the Roman Empire for 300 years. And this cult that started out by a small band of 12 men and their Messiah, Jesus, has now grown so that it is moved out of Judea, because it was originally just a sect of Judaism. It's really considered sort of a cult-like radical sect of Judaism that only influenced the Jewish people in Jerusalem and maybe a couple of the cities in northern Israel and the Galilee. But by 300 AD, it's beginning to spread all over the known world. And the Roman Empire has been infected by this uncontrollable new cult religion known as Christianity that insists that there is another king besides Caesar, and that king had been put to death by the Roman Empire, and the third day had come back to life again and was going away and had gone away to heaven to prepare his army to invade the earth and take over the world and overthrow the Roman Empire. That's what they viewed Christianity as, and Caesar was rightfully terrified by that. And so he set about to kill Christians to wipe it out. But as more people died, people in the Colosseum would see men, women, and children just like you guys, little kids, going to face the lion, singing a hymn about Jesus before the lion tears his head off. And nobody would renounce Christ. And the people sitting in the stadium, in the Colosseum, they began to wonder, what in the world is this? At first they thought it was sport. At first they thought it was fun to watch these heretical, crazy, fanatical people who threaten the Roman way of doing things be torn to pieces. But then when they saw, why on earth would an entire family be willing to have themselves torn to bits by a ravenous lion when all they have to do is say that they acknowledge Caesar and Jupiter and Aphrodite as gods as well. They can have whatever god they want as long as they include the other gods as well. Why would they be so exclusive that they'd be willing to lay down their lives for this thing? And that is why persecution and suffering in the hands of a Christian person who's really born again, God can use that to open and soften the hearts of pagan, hard-hearted, unbelieving people. So sometimes God allows us who are believers to go through hardship and sufferings and pain, because right now is not the time, as Joel Osteen has falsely said in the book that he wrote, Our Best Life Now, or Your Best Life Now. Christians aren't supposed to have their best life now here on the planet Earth. The Bible says Satan is the god of this world system, and therefore our best life is going to come later. You don't want to have your best life now. Nobody. Who's the youngest guy here? You're what? You're 7 now?
10.
10? Are you 10? All right, well, he's 10. So, all right, even he's older than I thought. So he doesn't have that much time left. At best, he's got, 80 years left maybe if he's really healthy. But, probably 50 to 60 years, he'll be dead too. And certainly everybody else in the room in 80 years will be dead.
I'm gone.
So do you want to have your best life only for just a few years? After you get past your 20s, you're really not physically fit enough to enjoy all of the pleasures of life anyway. You spend your life, as Albert was saying a little earlier, you spend your life going to work to pay your rent and, pay your bills, pay your mortgage, and you don't really get to enjoy life. And we weren't put here on the earth to enjoy life and the pleasures of this life. That's not why God put us here. We were put here so that we can be trained for our eternal positions of leadership and rulership alongside Jesus Christ throughout eternity. And that is what human beings were put on the earth for. The people who were thrown to the lions in the Roman Colosseum, they came to understand that because they read the Bible, they read the Old Testament. Now they had the letters of Paul and Peter and the Gospels floating around, so they were able to now read both the Old Testament and the New Testament, so that by the time you get to the early 300s AD, when the Romans are throwing Christians to the lions, and I promise I'll get back to the Halloween, but this is foundational. You know, when Christians are being thrown to the lions, the people in the audience began to wonder, man, that's stupid. And then it was, well, that's brave. That's heroic. And eventually, the people who were part of the Roman society, who were given bread and circuses to keep the people happy and distracted from the misery of their life, they began to realize, my life isn't so great. Yeah, we do have some benefits from being part of the Roman Empire, and we've conquered all these other nations and stole their wealth and their riches, and we've got a better standard of living than some other places in the world, but I'm not all that happy. And so the people in the audience, in the stands, watching the Christians being sacrificed, they began to become somewhat envious of the Christians who were being put to death. And they began to say, I wish I had something that I believed in so much, I'd be willing to lay down my life for it. That's what the Christian testimony eventually resulted in. The proof that these people had found something so powerful, so awesome, that they were happily willing to trade their lives in order to hold on to it. And that's something that they had found was Jesus and the promise of eternal life. You don't want your best life now, because no matter how old you get, none of you are going to get to be 300 years old. Nobody's going to live past, much past 100. I got a great-grandmother that lived, 103, 104, and her brother lived to be like 100 and something. But nobody made it to 105. Nobody made it to 120. Nobody made it to 200. You want your best life forever. And that's what being born again offers you. And so, with that, the people who sat in the stands began to realize that, hey, I want some of that. And so people like Paul and Peter had established a church in Rome. And that church in Rome, which had originally been established by Paul during his missionary journeys when he was put in prison in the Mamertine prison outside of the city of Rome, and eventually he was executed with it by getting his head cut off. The people that he had converted to Christ came from right out of Caesar's own palace. And then Peter came along a few years later and followed up and preached on it until Caesar arrested him and had him crucified. And so when Peter and Paul were killed, the Caesars thought, well, we've wiped out Christianity, we killed their leaders. No, just like killing Jesus didn't stop Christianity, it established it. And so more people converted to Christ because that's the example of a man willingly laying down his life to hold on to something that was so precious to him that his physical life wasn't even important anymore. That was something that everybody in their heart of hearts is looking for. And so Roman citizens began being converted to Christianity, which is why in about 325 AD, Satan said, this Christianity thing is out of hand. The more I kill these people, the bigger this thing grows. And now it's going to take over my world empire, which is based in the city of Rome. The people are going to stop worshiping Caesar as God, which is really worshiping me because I'm the one giving power to Caesar, and they're going to start worshiping this Jesus. So what Emperor Constantine did, I believe under the influence of Satan, is signed the Edicts of Toleration that says Christianity is no longer a crime punishable by death. And they signed another one that said not only is Christianity no longer punishable by death, it is now the official state religion of the Roman Empire. That was a brilliant move on the part of Satan, because what he did is he said, if you can't beat them, join them. He couldn't destroy Christianity from without by putting to death the leaders of Christianity. So he became a Christian himself. And so the false harlot apostate state church system had its horrible beginnings. in 325 AD when Constantine became the first protector of the church, the one who would build a bridge between pagan Rome and the Roman church that had born-again believers in the Roman Empire, which is why he took the Latin title for himself, Pontifex Maximus. And right to this very day, there's a leader in Rome that uses that very same title. Who's that?
Pope St. Francis.
That's right, the Pope uses the term pontiff. The pontiff means the bridge builder, the supreme bridge builder, Pontifex Maximus. And that title was first applied to a Roman emperor. Constantine co-opted that title, and he made himself the defender and protector of the Christian church in Rome, and made it officially the state religion of the Roman Empire. The reason why he did that was so that Rome wouldn't eventually lose out, because these people were spreading throughout the Roman Empire. But it was a smart move, because what Caesar was able to do, or Satan was able to do through Caesar, was to seductively inject into the pure body of Christ these people who were so dedicated to Jesus, they would happily give up their lives so they could go home and be with him in heaven. Now, when they see, oh my gosh, this must be a miracle. You know, we were supposed to be thrown to the lions tomorrow, and we were supposed to be put to death. But now, the guy who's going to put us to death says he's worshiping our God. So of course, the people who were part of the Roman church, they thought this was a miracle of God. So God told, Caesar to be the head of the Roman church. Who are we to question? God saved our lives. We were ready to die in the Colosseum tomorrow, but Caesar became a follower of Jesus. He didn't actually become a follower of Jesus. He became the head of the church, though, and by doing so, he then renamed all of the ancient pagan celebrations, including one called Christ Mass, or what was actually a pagan holiday where you would celebrate sexual activity and drunkenness. It was called the Saturnalia, and it was celebrated on a series of days leading up to December 25th, when they would worship the god of heaven, Saturn, and it was called Saturn's Day. And so you would have like a 3-day orgy, which would end on December 25th. And once Constantine co-opted the Church of Rome, he then renamed Saturnalia Christ Mass, the celebration of Christ. And that's where we get Christmas from. The idea that you are celebrating the birth of Christ on December 25th. There's no biblical support for Jesus being born on December 25th, because he wasn't born on December 25th. Hello? Yeah, send them up? Okay. So,
Where are we gonna put them?
yeah, right.
I think
Yeah, there's another chair. There's another chair I have here. Yeah, I've got another folding
Yeah, these chair back here is.
I got a folding chair.
Yes, okay.
okay.
So what was seductively done was, now Caesar made all the pagan Roman holidays Christianized. So Christmas now became an official Christian religion. It was never in the Bible that Jesus was born on December 25th. He was born in late September, early October. Jesus wasn't ever, supposed to, his birth wasn't supposed to be celebrated. There's nothing in the Bible that says that. And so Halloween was also celebrated. It was, part of the fall Druidic sacrifice where, bobbing for apples and all of that occurred. So we see in 325 AD a really important thing occurred, that the Roman Catholic state church system, and Catholic just means universal, that state church system took form in the city of Rome, and it spread around the world, and eventually it led to the Dark Ages. So 325 to 500 AD, the Druid SAH WEEN, which is the ancient Babylonian practice of sexual perversions and human blood sacrifice and killing children to make your crops grow, became Christianized as All Hallows Eve, or October 31st. October 31st was really Samhain. It was the day, or All Hallows Eve in the ancient Celtic was pronounced very similar to Halloween. The next day, the Catholic Church said would be All Saints' Day. November 1st would be All Saints' Day. December 31st would be All Hallows Eve or All Hallows Evening, and eventually it became contracted into Halloween. And so what Rome tried to do, and the Roman Catholic Church tried to do, was to Christianize an ancient satanic, druidic, Babylonian blood sacrifice ritual that would occur on October 31st of each year. And so, during the Middle Ages, from 500 AD onward to the Middle Ages, All Hallows Eve spread from Rome to Britannia as the Catholic Church began to spread throughout the world. And it became a Catholic sacrament. And so, this is where, and during this period of time, that we get the jack-o'-lantern, the costumes of demons, trick-or-treating, bobbing for apples, and we'll look at that in a little bit of detail. And eventually, as we move past there, we'll find out that Halloween spread from the British Isles to the United States of America, primarily because of the 1840 incident. Who knows what that was?
Irish potato famine.
Irish potato famine drove a number of Irish Catholics, and Irish people were now predominantly 90% Catholic. They were driven out of Ireland and the British Isles because of a fungus that caused all the potatoes to die, and they couldn't feed their families. They were agrarian people, farmers, and they relied upon, the starch that was provided by the tuber, which a potato is. And so they moved to the United States. They had a tradition back in ancient Ireland where they would carve out a turnip gourd and put a candle in it because of a story about a guy named Jack who supposedly, saw Satan climb a tree one day and carved a cross into it to trap him in the tree. And then when Satan said, "I can't come down from the tree unless you remove the cross," and Jack said, "I'll let you down if you tell me that when I die you won't allow me into hell." And so Jack, being a shrewd fellow, cut a deal with Satan that in exchange for a promise never to drag him down into hell after he dies if he doesn't get to heaven, he'd let Satan down from the tree. And so he covered the cross. Satan was able to come down from the tree. Jack lived a long life. When he died, because he cut a deal with the devil, he couldn't go to heaven because he wasn't a good guy. So he was supposed to go into hell. But when Satan came to grab him to take him down in hell, he was like, "Hey, remember we had the deal. I'm the guy that let you down from the tree." And Satan, apparently realizing that he had been tricked, he said, "Doggone it, I lost the soul that was supposed to be mine." Became so angry at Jack, he was like, "Get out of here." And he grabs a coal fire from hell, throws it at Jack, and Jack ducks and dodges it. But now Jack's a dead man. Now remember, he's a spirit. He's a disembodied spirit wandering the earth. He can't go to heaven because God won't let him in. He can't go to hell either because Satan, can't let him in because he made a deal. So Jack is cursed to haunt the earth forever, walking around in the darkness as spirits do. And so supposedly what he did was he took a turnip gourd and he carved it out and put a face in it and stuck the burning coal that Satan threw at him and put it in the turnip gourd and carries it around to lighten his path as he wanders throughout the darkness of eternal death for all time. That's where the tradition of carving out a gourd and putting a candle in it with a face on it to show the spirit of the damned Jack, and it was called a jack-o'-lantern, or lantern of Jack. And after the Irish potato famine, all of these Irish Catholics moved to the United States of America. One second. Are you sorry? You can't say? I got a chair, but you can't. I got a chair. Hold on. You don't mind?
Welcome.
How are you? See you.
Zuhida.
Esther, Esther. Dorothy, and Helene.
Okay.
And this is
You want me to go this morning?
It's
Oh, Albert, you. All right, so, man, got a full house here all of a sudden. I know it.
More people in chairs, Sister Bob.
So, that's where the whole idea of pumpkins came from. Carving pumpkins came from the jack-o'-lantern of Ireland. And so, the Irish potato famine brings all of these Irish Catholics to the United States. It's interesting to note that originally in 1776, when the United States of America was founded, Catholicism was outlawed, and so was Halloween. Catholics weren't trusted as, part of the American society because of the control and the influence of the Jesuits, who had destroyed many nations in the past, and so they were distrusted. And Catholicism was never welcomed in the original colonies of the United States. It was the Protestants, the Puritans, the individuals who were the evangelical Christians who fled England to escape from the official state church system of England that had been sort of crystallized in the form of the Anglican Church, which was a Protestant form of Roman Catholicism. When the King of England had a falling out with the Pope, and he got excommunicated because he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn or whatever. He wanted to get married a second time, and the Pope said, "Nope, we're not letting you get married." So he said, "I'm getting remarried anyway, and and the Pope said, "You're excommunicated. You're out of the Catholic Church, can't go to heaven." So he created his own church, and he called it the Church of England. And the Church of England had set up all kinds of rules, similar to the Catholic Church, except priests were allowed to get married. And so the Anglican Church became oppressive and governmentally controlled, just like the Church of Rome did. So the Puritans, who were the real born-again evangelical Christians who fled the British Isles because they wanted to be free to worship Jesus, however they wanted to, without the Roman or the Church of England dictating to them. They didn't want the Pope in Rome or the Archbishop of Canterbury telling them how they could worship Jesus or what Bible they were allowed to read. And so eventually these people left England and came to the United States of America at risk of life and limb because it was a wilderness. And it was only through the providence of God that the first pilgrims were able to survive that first Thanksgiving here in the United States, which is where we get our celebration of Thanksgiving. So from 1776 onward, the Puritan Christians, who were hardcore fundamentalist evangelical Christians, did not acknowledge Halloween because they thought it was an occultic ritual that was worshiping the devil. And Catholics weren't really welcome in the United States either. And even the few that came over didn't have a lot of influence until the Irish potato famine of 1840. A flood of Roman Catholics came in the form of Irish Catholics that resettled in the United States of America. From about 1840 to about 1900, the United States still rejected the ancient satanic druidic blood rite sacrifice, which was the fall harvest festival of Samhain, which was now being referred to as Halloween. It was still outlawed as a pagan practice and fell into disfavor amongst the people, even amongst the Irish Catholics that came over. But because so many of them came over, that it became sort of a tradition in the Roman Catholic enclaves in the United States, in cities like Boston or in New York City, where there were large groups of Irish Catholics. And as these people spread to the Midwest being more of an agrarian sort of culture, where farmers made their living by farming the land. They lived in a house next to a barn and they grew crops, and that's how they made their living. So the idea that rituals could be done to cause your crops to grow better became appealing. So ancient Babylonian paganism, which resurfaced as Celtic Druidism during the Middle Ages, where human blood sacrifices were made to make the crops grow, began to resurface in the United States of America, in the heartland of America, the Midwest where I grew up. You could see barns painted with occultic symbols. Why? Because they thought that these occultic symbols painted on the side of a barn would cause the green man, which was another term for Satan, who also called himself the sun god, or the consort of the Mother Nature, who is really Pomona or Aphrodite or Semiramis, all these goddess names throughout the years, and really Satan dressed in drag and obtaining the worship of God that God should receive by disguising himself as a goddess. And so we saw that, in the early 1900s, it became more popularized as the idea that you could make your crops grow and you could make your farm successful by engaging somewhat in Druidic practices, which is why Wicca and things of that nature began to secretly seep back into the American culture. So, the final major point we're going to talk about before we go into detail is Halloween has become the most popular adult holiday in the United States of America. Now, as of 2012, it was about $8.2 billion in sales annually. That's a lot of money. 8.2, that's almost $10 billion. But as of now, we're well over $10 billion a year in sales. There are Halloween stores that sell stuff year-round, and only the horn industry and Christmas can generate more income than the single-day holiday of Halloween, which is an astounding thing. And when we look at what is really worship in Halloween, we see that it's really a worship of death and Satanism and demonism. And we've talked about how the ancient Celtic Druid priests would force people to sacrifice their children in order to appease the gods. The idea was when SAH WEEN first began to become formalized in the ancient Emerald Isle of Ireland and Britannia, it was believed that on October 31st, that's when the veil between the land of the living and the spirit world was at its very thinnest. And on that night, they believed that the spirits who were otherwise trapped in the underworld were allowed to come out and roam the earth for one night a year. And that night would be October 31st. And so the idea of wearing costumes, that's part of the Halloween tradition. As a kid, I certainly participated in that in the Midwest. It was a big thing, carving pumpkins and going trick-or-treating and wearing costumes. I had no idea that it was an ancient satanic blood sacrifice ritual. The idea of wearing costumes started really back in ancient Druidic Britannia, where townspeople on October 31st would believe that, hey, we can't go out of the house because the demons or the dead people, they thought people who had died came back from the dead and they would haunt the earth, and that mischievous demons would come out of the ground as well. And they said, man, if we go out to the corner store on October 31st, we might get attacked by demons. So they came up with the idea, if they disguise themselves as one of them, again, if you can't beat them, join them. So people would dress up like demons or ghosts or dead people and kind of wander through town, so that when they're going through town, if they encountered a demonic entity or a spirit of the dead, they would think, oh, that's one of us. We won't do anything to hurt them. And supposedly the idea was that these demonic entities would come to the person's house and knock on the door and demand tribute. Give us something, or we'll kill your cows. We'll take your cat and tear its tail off, or we'll set your barn on fire. And so people were afraid that these spirits of the dead who were released from their prisons in Hades and darkness under the earth, who now, for one night only, could wander the earth, that if they didn't provide booty or a treat or a bribe, then they would incur some type of mischief, maybe even including the killing of livestock or maybe the killing of someone in their family. So they started gathering together cakes and pastries and sweetmeats, and they would offer it. And after a while, people got the idea, if I disguise myself as a ghost or a spirit of the dead, I can go to my neighbor's house and extort stuff from him. I can get food and all kinds of treats and maybe even some money by dressing up as a ghost or a spirit of the dead or a demon. And that's where getting dressed up in costumes and going and knocking on the door and saying trick or treat. Like, in other words, give me a treat, or I'm going to perform a dirty trick on you, maybe kill your cat, destroy your livestock, burn down your farm. And so people on this night would give out things candies, sweets, as a bribe to keep the spirits of the dead from doing evil or harm to them. People dressed up in costumes of dead people or spirits or ghouls to scare away the demons or trick the demons into thinking he's one of us, so we're not going to hurt him. Or in the alternative, so that they could extort and frighten their neighbors into giving them stuff that they normally would not be given. And that's where the idea of dressing up in scary costumes and going door to door saying trick or treat. We've already talked about bobbing for apples. That was part of the Roman tradition where, because the ancient Druidic practice of Druidism required human blood sacrifice to appease the god of the sky, the green man or the horned god. Sometimes he was referred to, Cernunnos is the horned god, the consort or the mistress of Mother Nature, who supposedly acted in conjunction with the green man to cause crops to grow. So in ancient Druidic practice, you would put to death a child along with animals and maybe even an adult or two to appease the gods. And if the lot fell to you, this year Albert has to be put to death on Halloween. Under the Roman tradition, there was an exception given, like, well, if you bob for apples and you can get the apple in your mouth, that means the goddess Pomona has, looked upon you favorably and will spare your life. But the catch was, unlike what we did when we bobbed for apples as kids in the Midwest growing up in Michigan, maybe put in a barrel of water and you stick your head down there, you try to grab it, and it was fun and it was exciting and you could laugh and it was a game. But in ancient Rome, you would bob for apples that were floating in boiling oil. So the person was like, either you're going to get thrown into the Wicker Man and burned to death right now, or you can stick your face into that vat of chicken fat and try to grab an apple. And, if you grab it, you'll be disfigured for life and you'll be blind because your eyes will be burned out of your head. But at least you'll be alive, and people would choose to do that. So that's what the tradition of bobbing for apples is. So when we ask ourselves as Christians, as followers of Jesus, is it okay for Christians to participate in rituals that historically were types of torturous perversions that killed human beings? And I've said before, and I'll say it again, on Halloween, somewhere right here in the state of Florida, somewhere in Michigan, my own land, and somewhere everywhere in North America and around the world, somebody's going to be put to death as part of a satanic or Wiccan occultic ritual. Whether you believe or somebody else believes that spirits can be appeased by putting human beings to death doesn't matter. The question is, do they believe it? And they do believe it, and that's why we see these satanic ritual murders occurring on occultic high holidays, particularly Halloween, which is the highest form of occultic rituals. As a prosecutor, some of you know I'm a former career prosecutor, I've prosecuted a number of different cases, including a satanic ritual homicide, where the guy did a satanic ritual, killed the guy, and then chopped his body parts up and consumed some of them to gain supernatural powers. And because he was representing himself, we would talk about his religious beliefs, and he basically admitted that this is the way that a adept, which is what he called himself, a master of the occult, would obtain occultic power by killing an enemy and then eating its body parts. That dates all the way back to ancient Babylonian paganism, the ancient Babylon of Nimrod and Semiramis, where all of this got its start. It got popularized again by the Druids and the Celts, during the time of the Roman Empire. And eventually it spread to Britannia, which is now Great Britain, and Ireland and Scotland. And that's why these beautiful castles, these haunting and romantic looking castles throughout Scotland and Ireland, inside those castles undoubtedly is evidence of Druidic human blood sacrifices, which occur and continue up until this day. So again, the question remains, are Christians able to do this very thing? Can we take the ancient Druidic blood sacrifice that eventually was renamed by Pope Gregory the Great, All Hallows Eve, or Halloween as we call it now, when it was actually just an ancient Druidic blood sacrifice holiday? is that okay in the eyes of God? And I would submit to you that it's not. We've talked about, how it started out, ancient Babylon, and then it moved to the Druids in Europe as they moved from the Indo-European Aryan people moved into the British Isles and started Druidism all over again. Druidism now is underground, but it's resurfacing. We see these types of things when we see in the news some story of some teenagers taking another teenager out to the woods and stabbing her 20 times, like there were like these two juvenile girls, like 14, 16,
Yeah, I heard that, yeah.
14 and 15-year-old girl took their 13-year-old classmate out to the woods and stabbed her 20 times because they were trying to do a blood sacrifice because they had seen it on the internet, like, oh, this is how you do it, you get demonic power and make Johnny go out on a date with me, so we got to kill somebody. And so we see these types of things occurring again and again and again, and people say, gosh, well, that's odd. Why are people doing these things? And people are doing these things because, again, Jesus is not the God of this world. The Bible says that Satan is the God of this world. And until Jesus comes back to establish his kingdom on the earth, and that's what we're told we should pray for, the so-called Lord's Prayer says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Jesus was teaching his disciples to pray that the establishment of the kingdom would come quickly. And so when that happens, there'll be no more Halloween. You won't have Christmas, you won't have any of these pagan Roman holidays that have been Christianized by the Roman Catholic Church and foisted upon us as something good to do. And another point about Halloween, I mentioned a little bit earlier for those of you who came a little later about sympathetic magic. When you do certain practices, whether your intention is good or not is irrelevant. When you do certain ancient rituals, many of which date all the way back to King Solomon in the Bible, who became apostatized and used his amazing wisdom to understand occultic arts, which resulted in him forming what's now referred to as the Star of David. The hexagram, a six-pointed star, actually wasn't David's star. David knew nothing of that star. It was really the Star of Solomon. And if you study witchcraft, the occult, and Satanism, you'll see that in actuality it was King Solomon who eventually, because he married all of these pagan women and they were witches and involved in witchcraft, he was seduced into witchcraft because he wanted to appease his wife. The whole story of the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 3, all over again. When Adam ate the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he didn't do it because he was tricked by Satan. Satan tricked Eve. Eve seduced Adam into following along after her in rebellion against God. And that's what happened to King Solomon. And he betrayed God and used his wisdom and his intellect, which is greater than any man, to divine things of a metaphysical nature, of the occult. Again, hidden knowledge that unleashed or opened the doors to massive amounts of power, massive amounts of wisdom, and we see that that's how Satan gains control over the people of the planet Earth, by compromise. I'll give you hidden knowledge that will help you build the greatest empires on the earth, to help you build the greatest army on earth, to help you build the first rocket ship to go to the moon, to help you build the first nuclear reactor, to help you build a time machine, whatever it is. Satan has made that deal with the Mayans, with the Incans, with all the Mesoamerican people. You see these pyramids that are built. What's that?
Ancient Egypt?
Ancient Egypt as well. And we see that these ancient people had advanced mathematic and scientific abilities. How? The vast majority of the people wandering through Central America at the time were like, Native Americans, Indians who, were basically hunting, in the woods and basically living pretty primitive lifestyles. And then, in the space of just a few years, they created the most incredible mathematical precise structures that are lined up with the stars of the heaven. Supernatural stargates. How did these people go from hunting deer in the woods to becoming the greatest minds of mathematics and metaphysics? Because they made a deal with the plumed god serpent, Quetzalcoatl. If you're familiar with Mesoamerican literature and rituals, they believe that a god came down to earth in the form of a serpent with wings. And this god gave them hidden knowledge, how to build the pyramids, how to use astronomy to tell time, and how to do occultic things. In exchange, they'd have to take their kids to the top of the pyramids on the ancient high holy holidays and kill them. And that is the cult of the plumed serpent god Quetzalcoatl required human blood sacrifice, just like in ancient Babylon, just like the ancient Druids. These things repeat themselves over and over and over again. So the question is, can Christians do this? And I would submit to you, all of this stuff is talked about in the Bible, and again, we'll look at it this week, and the next time we'll finish it up as well. But we'll start out by going to John chapter 8, verse 44, if you would, Steve. Read that for us. And while you're doing that, I'll flip over to 1 Peter chapter 5 and take a look at verse 8 for me.
John chapter 8, verse 44.
Yep.
Okay. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it.
Okay, so the first point that underpins our review of Halloween and whether or not it's an okay tradition for Christians to participate in, or one of the most popular costumes out there is, you get Dracula, whatever, but Satan makes, the horn guy,
Sure.
he's the most popular dude.
Number one, yeah.
Over the course of history, he's outdone Superman, Spider-Man, Batgirl, Easter Bunny or whatever. Satan makes the most popular Halloween costume. The horns, even I had a devil costume as a kid. It was amazing. I had the tail.
I was Casper the Friendly Ghost.
Well, see, you were a little different. I had a devil tail and horns and all that stuff.
And even the one for the girls, it's the, kind of...
Sexy Satan,
right?
Seductress Satan.
Yeah.
And so the question is Satan a real person? Is he a real entity, or is he a mythological motif, a meme that we can make fun of and participate? Well, we just found out from Jesus that Satan is a real person. And not only was he a liar, but he was a murderer from the beginning. And how was he a murderer from the beginning? Because when he went to Eve in the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3 and told her, God's a liar. You're not going to die if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You're going to become the first goddess, the first Wiccan, the first woman who pursued goddesshood through occultic hidden knowledge, which is what the word occult means, hidden knowledge. Tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And another way to state that would be the tree of occultic knowledge. Eve, became the first witch, the first Wiccan, the first woman to pursue godhood or goddesshood through occultic means. Satan tricked her into doing that, and in doing so, killed her that day, because the Bible says, in the day you eat thereof, you shall surely die. Her spirit died immediately in the first 24-hour period of time. But because God sees a day, according to the Bible, as 1,000 years, she also died physically within one God day, which is 1,000 years. It says both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, God sees 1,000 years as a day, and a day as 1,000 years. Not as millions and millions of years, but as 1,000 years. So when we look at the genealogies in the Old Testament, we see a bunch of guys who lived really, really long time. And the oldest man in the history of the planet Earth, who knows the name of that guy?
Melchizedek.
No. Enoch. Enoch was close. He was old, but there was one guy older than him.
Montezuma?
Montezuma? No, that's one of the
Aztec.
that's what American gods. That's what the Aztec god.
It was 969 years old?
That's how old he was. 869 years. Who was that?
960.
Starts with a letter. Can I buy a vowel? Alex, an M.
Moses.
No.
Close.
No.
Messiah.
That's very close to that. It's close to Melchizedek.
That's what I said.
Any of you guys ever heard the colloquial term, you're as old as
Methuselah.
Methuselah? There you go. That's the guy. Methuselah lived to be 969 years of age. He almost made it to 1,000, which would be a day in God's eyes. But even he couldn't make it to the 1,000-year period, because God predicted in the day that you eat, you'll die.
Who was the second one? I thought Enoch was the...
Noah lived over 800 years. Enoch probably lived,
300 years. I just read the genealogy like 2 or 3 nights ago.
What was it?
It's only about 300
Yeah,
years.
There's several guys that made it to 800. In fact, there are a bunch of guys that aren't even mentioned.
No, but I think,
Wait, now?
Jesus took Enoch.
Yeah.
Yeah, Enoch was the guy that never died. So
He-
Enoch and Elijah never died. But there are people that died, but nobody lived on the planet Earth past 1,000 years, because the Bible says in Genesis chapter 3, in the day you eat thereof, you shall surely die. Satan told Eve, you're not going to die, you're going to become a god. And so that's where witchcraft, started. Witchcraft started in Genesis chapter 3. And Eve, shockingly, was the very first Wiccan, the very first witch. Goodness forbid, who knew? And so Jesus thinks that Satan is a real person. So the question is, should we be dressing up and, celebrating the guy who's the very first murderer? He's responsible for every death in the history of the planet Earth. Everybody dies because of the curse of sin. And everybody dies because of the curse of sin, because Satan tricked our mother Eve into betraying God. And as a result, everybody that dies, that death is eventually going to be legally attributable, not only to Adam because he listened to the voice of his wife, but also attributable to Satan. That's why Jesus says he was a murderer from the beginning. That wasn't just poetry. He's saying in Genesis 3, he killed Adam and Eve, not with a gun or a knife, but by tricking Eve into believing that God had lied to her. And so now, if you will, Albert, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8.
Be sober, be diligent, because
That's good. He's got to memorize.
your adversary, the devil, the guy you're against, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour.
Wow. So now we understand these Druidic Babylonian blood sacrifices a little bit better now. When we see on November 1st, we read in the newspaper, after Halloween, a week later we'll read some story of some teen girl's body found in the woods with the heart missing and the liver missing and her eyeballs gouged out and her body, sexually violated. Why on earth are these horrifically violent killings occurring? They're not robbing somebody for a purse, like give me your gun, give me your car, or I'll kill you. And you shoot somebody in a carjacking. That's not what these satanic ritual murders are about. These rituals are because these people are possessed by the spirit of Satan and fallen demons. And it says that our adversary, the devil, meaning the one who's against us, is like a roaring lion. A lion that's roaring tears people into shreds. And he's walking about seeking whom he may devour. And Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2, whoever can get to that first, read that for us. Again, these are all verses in the Bible that talk about Satan as a real person, not as some mythological cartoon character, not as some non-existent meme that parents tell their children to make them do their homework on time or not skip school or something. The boogeyman will get you if you don't make your bed, or whatever. Satan is a real person. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2.
Where in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience.
So we find out now that the prince of the power of the air, which is another title or pseudonym for Satan, Satan is the prince of the power of the air. He controls all of the governments of the planet Earth. How does he do that? By manipulating the leadership. He can manipulate the leadership when he goes to Bohemian Grove every, August in Southern California or Central California, and all the world leaders come to meet. Or when the Bilderbergs meet in Oosterbeek, Holland, where they meet together to plan the New World Order. All of these world empires or these world national leaders who control the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, and they can control, through the control of finance, what the governments of the nations of the world do. And the governments control the people. And that's why, my position is on voting and all that, it's a fool's errand. Because both sides of the coin have been rigged. Whether you go Democrat or Republican, the Luciferians that control the world on behalf of Satan control all of the politicians. And so as a result, you're better spent investing your time in learning the Bible, getting some chick tracts, and passing them out to the people. And that's what we should be doing. Passing out tracts, telling people that Jesus is Lord, or talking to your friends about Jesus, and waiting for the Lord to return. That's how we affect real change, permanent change, is when you impact somebody for Jesus Christ. If you're born again, if you're saved, you store up for yourself treasures in heaven by leading people to the Lord. Things in this world are of a temporary nature. Now, let's take a look. Ephesians chapter 6. Here's yet another verse underlying the idea, underpinning the idea. Oh, you did? Okay. So Albert, Steve, or whichever one of you guys, you got your Bible over there?
I have
If you want.
another version, ASCII version.
Oh, well.
Hank, what 6? What?
You can't. You don't have a thing where you can click on it and switch to King
Change the
James.
version. Change to King James.
On my little app, I can just
You
hit
should.
a
Yeah. I
button.
think it is.
See if you can switch over to King James. Steve, hit Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12.
For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
That's who we're fighting against, guys. We're fighting against spirit beings. These fallen angels who disguise themselves as gods and goddesses, who are masquerading around as helpers, spiritual helpers for the people. They're real entities. And the Bible says we are fighting with these people against powers, principalities, and rulers of darkness of this world. Against spiritual wickedness in what? High places. The governments of the world, I can assure you, are under the control of these spiritual rulers of darkness. This is unquestionably the Word of God. So these entities are real. To glorify them or pretend to be them one day a year for fun is a mistake. It sends the wrong idea. And again, when I talk to you guys about sympathetic magic, if you do certain rituals, whether you intend good or not, or intend evil or not, you will bring upon yourself interaction with demonic entities, spiritual beings. I know, Bill Schobline, who's a guy who's, now is a minister. He says he went trick-or-treating as a kid, and he saw demons in the air, and he became demon-possessed after that. He said, I was dressed up like a clown. I wasn't even dressed like Satan, but, I was out there, and I looked up, and I saw these demonic entities staring down at me from a tree. So it was a beautiful Midwestern night, we're out trick-or-treating, having fun. And that's how he was seduced into the occult and spent many years doing all kinds of horrific, evil things as he got deeper and deeper, first into the occult and then into witchcraft and then into Satanism. But he said it started when I was like an 11-year-old kid just walking down the street trick-or-treating, dressed up like a clown, having fun. And from that point onward, the spirits knew, because I participated in a ritual that opened the door of permission for them to come and interact with me, and they overpower my will and seduce me into the darkness because I had opened the door to them. And we can see that by participating in occultic rituals, you are opening the door to satanic or demonic influences being able to come into your life. So the question is, if you let your kids dress up and send them out into the night, like my parents did, they let me do it, and it was fun, I had a great time as a kid. But I do remember, before I came to Christ, I was scared of the dark, man, because I had strange encounters at nighttime. Before I got saved, there was no question that I had, what I can now look back and see, certainly had to be metaphysical harassment and encounters with spirit or demonic entities. But, as a kid, I just figured, I'm a kid, my parents, you're a kid, scared like you were watching Sir Graves Ghastly, or you watched that horror movie, creature feature, double feature. Remember as a kid we would do that, and then we'd go to bed scared. Mom, I'm scared, can I sleep with the light on? Right? What was that?
The Exorcist.
Oh, wait, now that was hard. Now that's not even funny, because my parents actually took me to see that.
Oh, my
And that scarred me.
That is
for life.
hardcore, yeah.
That movie wasn't like Frankenstein or Dracula. That movie, painted a picture for me
Yeah.
of the reality of demon possession. And the thing about Frankenstein and the werewolf and Dracula, my parents said, that's Hollywood, the B acting. You can see the cardboard, gravestone shaking in the background.
Sure.
And so you're like, Dracula and Frankenstein, that's not real. But when you saw The Exorcist and found out it was based on, because I got the book and I read, I was like, wait a minute, like a real person in, Washington D.C., and a priest at Georgetown University, where I eventually went to law school at. I actually, when I go back and go to D.C. next week, actually, I run up and down the stairs when I'm finishing my run. I run up and down the stairs that are in that Exorcist movie because it's the steepest set of stairs I've ever encountered anywhere on the planet Earth, and it's great for cardio and all that stuff. But that's the staircase that supposedly this demon-possessed person threw the priest out, who became possessed by the devil. If you see the movie The Exorcist, he falls down these stairs, the M Street stairs that lead from the apartment to down to M Street in Georgetown. And that's where the person died. When I saw that movie, that's when I knew I needed to get saved. Because I was like, man, hold up. Yeah. This is real. Satan's a real horrific, scary dude, man. He's not some friendly. And the kid in The Exorcist became possessed. How? Not by going out in the woods and doing satanic blood ritual orgies or something. She was like 9 years old or 10 years old. By playing with a Ouija board. Who didn't play with a Ouija board when they were a kid? I know I did, and our parents let us do it. But every time we did, later that night, my dad said the same thing. He had scary, weird incidents and occurrences for playing with toys that aren't toys. The Ouija board isn't it's funny because I was listening to another guy named John Todd who had converted out of witchcraft and Satanism into being a born-again Christian, and eventually was martyred for his faith. He was saying that when he grew up in witchcraft, he said, no witch kids played with the Ouija board. We were too smart for that. We knew that demons were running the Ouija board. We didn't want anything to do with the Ouija board. We were, involved in nature gods and witchcraft and interacting with the positive spirits of nature, but we were smart enough to know, don't play around with the Ouija board. That's where the demons operate. And so even witch kids wouldn't fool around with the Ouija board because it was so dark and occultic. But American kids, especially in the Midwest, man, you can go to Kmart or any of the and you see right next to, Milton Bradley, you see the Ouija board right next to Monopoly. And we buy them, bring them home, and play with the planchette and turn the lights off. And we had some weird, scary experiences with the Ouija board as a kid because it was a platform that opened the door to demonic oppression, which is why I was probably more terrified of the dark as a kid than most, because weird things would happen in the dark. And I'd sense the presence of entities in the dark because, I innocently did things like played with Ouija boards or went trick-or-treating dressed up as the devil and did all kinds of stuff before I got saved. But then, once I got born again, all that stuff ended overnight, just overnight. And it's proof that these demonic entities are in the air, looking down, trying to find somebody who opens the door. And, you see these vampire movies or whatever, and one of the continuing or common motifs are the vampire will come to the house and say, "Yeah, come in." They have to have permission. And I relate that back to what we see about what the Bible says about the spirit entities. You have to give Satan and the fallen angels and demons permission to be in your life. They can't just come and bum rush you and take over and carjack your life. But if you open the door by participating in unholy practice, whether it be the occult, drug usage, inappropriate sexual activities, those are all door openers for demonic entities, which are real. What my parents tried to do, they say, oh, well, the Bible's real and Jesus is real, but ghosts and demons and all that, that's not real. When I was terrified out of my mind by The Exorcist, my parents were like, oh, but that's not real, don't worry about it. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. The Bible, I was reading, Gospel of John as a kid, and I stumbled across a verse that Jesus was talking about the devil. And in another verse, Jesus was talking about demons and cast a demon out of a person. I was like, wait a minute. Well, there was demon possession in the Bible, so obviously this Exorcist movie can't be that far off. And so parents would tell you that because now they know you're scared and they want to, be able to go to bed without you sitting up. And, I crawl into bed with my parents, like, I'm scared, I can't sleep in the room. I was like, there's something in my room, and there was. And so I crawled in my parents' bed. And it was their fault because they would allow me to participate in the unfruitful works of darkness. So we find out in Ephesians chapter 6, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, against principalities, rulers of darkness. Matthew chapter 4, Who can get to Matthew chapter 4 for us, real quick?
Matthew chapter 4,
Verse 1, start there.
Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil.
Oh, wait a minute, so there's this devil person. Maybe it's just a me, maybe it's just a, bad thought or depression in the mind of Jesus. Starting at verse 5, reading through verse 11, 5 through 11.
Then the devil taketh him into the holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, and said unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Jesus said unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Again the devil taketh him up into an exceedingly high mountain, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and said unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him.
So what we learn from that series of passages is that there is a real entity, and it's a real person called the devil. And he has power, because he took Jesus to the mountains, a high mountain, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world. And said, if you bow down and worship me, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. Now, Jesus didn't say, you don't control these kingdoms. You're just make-believe. You're just a fairy tale. You're a figment of my imagination. No, what he said, is that get away from me. You're supposed to worship the Lord, your God, only. He didn't say that Satan doesn't really control all the kingdoms of the world. He tacitly admitted that Satan is the God of this world and does control these kingdoms of the world. So we know that angels are real and the devil is a real person. Now we'll take a look at a couple of verses that make reference to the Antichrist and demons. Are demons and the Antichrist a real person? The Antichrist, according to the Bible, is a person who is completely possessed by the devil. The devil actually lives inside of his body and will be manifest during the last 7-year period of time called the 70th week of Daniel after the rapture of the church. During this 7-year tribulation period of time, a man will come from out of nowhere, and he'll be a charismatic man, and that man will be possessed by the devil. He will literally be Satan in human flesh. Steve, read for us 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, if you would, and take a look at verse 9. Oh, question. Comment.
The bathroom.
Yes. I think, did somebody just go in there? Oh, yes, right there. Right here.
Thank you.
So 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
And you said verse 9.
And start us out at verse 9.
Okay. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders.
Okay, and so we find out, so, Paul is talking about Satan in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And then what we find out now, if we flip forward, is that the Antichrist gets his power from what? Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders. Now, take a look over at Daniel chapter 8, verses 23 to 25. Albert, you want to get that one? Or Steve?
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Sure. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, And he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince.
Stop right there. So what we see here is the Antichrist. One, it says that a king will arise, and he will understand dark sentences. That means he will be a black magician. He will be a practitioner of the occult. Verse 25 says that he shall cause craft to prosper. He's not talking about arts and crafts where he's teaching the kids to paint by numbers.
Right.
He's talking about teaching witchcraft to the people. The Antichrist will be a powerful, satanically possessed sorcerer, just like you see in Lord of the Rings or in The Hobbit or whatever, some guy who can control the weather and control all kinds of things by using occultic power, and he can manipulate the unseen spirits of the world. Now we take a look at whether or not the Bible lends credence to the idea that demons, which is another very popular, lots of kids dress up as demons or devils on Halloween. Are demons real entities, or are they make-believe? Well, we'll find out what Jesus' position is. Matthew chapter 12. Albert, you want to read that for us? Verses 43 to 45. Matthew chapter 12.
When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, seeking rest, and findeth none. Then he said, I will return into my house from whence I came out. And when he is come, he findeth it empty, swept and garnished. Then goeth he and taketh with himself 7 other spirits, more wicked than himself. And they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. Even so shall it also unto this wicked generation.
Okay, so that's where we'll end off. But that clearly makes Albert, the unclean spirit is the same entity that's referred to throughout the Bible as a demon. Daemonia is the Greek term. So we find out what? Antichrist is a satanically possessed, apparently in a human form, a man who is a sorcerer. So we know that sorcery, witchcraft, and demons and demon possession are all real paradigms. So dressing up to celebrate that and making fun of it and pretending that we're part of that is what I would submit to you, a door that opens into the occult and opens into the door of your children. So the idea that it's okay for Christians to participate and non-Christians to participate, it's a mistake. Because Satan is what? Our adversary, Albert? And as the adversary, he's what? He's seeking to do what?
Kill, destroy.
Yep, still to kill, destroy.
Well, yeah, he'll come. First he'll take your finances, then he'll take your house, then he'll take your wife or your husband. And after he does that, then he'll maybe get you sick for a while. And after you're really sick, he goes, well, let me just finish him off. Let me just squash him. Let me take his soul.
Yeah.
With God's permission, of course.
Yeah. So what we find out then is that Halloween, again, is a practice where all of these entities in the Bible are condemned and will eventually face the wrath of God. So we don't want to be participating in that. So again, this is the month of October, and during the month of October, we're going to be looking at some of these occultic things so that as we approach October 31st, we can be prayed up. Because I can assure you that there will be deaths and there will be human blood sacrifices on October 31st. Can't tell you where they'll be, can't tell you who's going to do it, but it's going to happen because it happens every year. And so until Satan is thrown off the throne of this world, he's going to continue to promote his agenda through Halloween, making the blood sacrifice, the persecution of the human race by this megalomaniacal monster called Satan. But he makes it cool, he makes it hip. He makes it the most popular adult holiday on planet Earth. And there'll be $10 billion in sales surrounding the glorification and the worship of Satan through Halloween, which is a sympathetic form of magic that opens the door to you being involved in the occult and makes you a part of the satanic roots of Halloween. So we'll look at more of that when we return, and what we'll do, close out in prayer real quick, Albert.
Dear Lord, thank you, Jesus, for this Bible study today, dear Lord. Thank you for the wisdom that was disseminated via her study of the book, the Bible. Thank you, Lord, for Genevieve and her family, Lord. Bless the children. Guide them, Jesus. Put angels around them. Keep them safe, dear Lord. And Lord, bring us back next week, the same Bible study, providing that you haven't returned beforehand. Bring us back, dear Lord, and bless everyone here, dear Lord. And bless those watching via the internet. And Jesus, again, I thank you for this knowledge, for this day, and for my health, dear Lord. And for everyone else in here and their health, dear Lord. Thank you, Jesus. Touch their hearts in your name, amen.
Any questions or comments before we go off
Yeah.
here? Yeah.
You know, many years ago, a friend of mine owned a video store.
Mhm.
He goes, Albert, I have a present for you. So, he gave me a life-size poster of Eddie Kruger. Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
So I go, what am I going to do with this? So I gave it to a friend of mine. She lived at the Georgian condo on the beach, and she had 2 kids like their age. So I set up in the bedroom, and everything was okay. It was a nice present. 2 weeks later, she calls me up. She goes, Albert, please come and get the poster. The kids are having nightmares.
Wow, Albert had a situation like that as a kid. Yeah.
She had like fear. So I had to go right away because the kids were having nightmares of Freddy Krueger.
So again,
And Freddy Krueger took horror to another dimension.
it's a talisman. It's a charged object in the occult. There are a number of stories where the people who are engaged in witchcraft, for instance, John Todd gave his testimony about what was done with rock and roll master tapes when he was in the music industry. He said that that the albums are cut off of, which is this big, gigantic, like 8-track tape looking thing. He said it would be taken to the ritual room at Capitol Records in Los Angeles, and they would go in there and have a high ceremonial witch or sorcerer do a satanic ritual and pray over the master and order demons to go into the master and come off of each copy made into a record that a demon would follow, each vinyl record printed off the master tape, so that when you buy the album and bring it into your home and play it on your stereo, the demon comes into your home with you. You would allow him in because you gave him permission to bring, because he had a right to be in the record, and you bought the record and brought it into your house, and now the demon can be in your home. And so we see that certain objects can be charged demonically. That's why wearing occultic jewelry, the pentagram, the hexagram, all of these, symbols of witchcraft, like the 5-pointed star in a circle, sign of witchcraft, 6-pointed star, sign of Satanism, black magicians, and black magic. These things can open metaphysical, parasympathetic portals that will allow demonic entities to fill your life with misery. And, that's why kids at night, who are very sensitive, animals and kids are sensitive to things that go bump in the night in the spirit world. And sometimes parents unwittingly bring talismans or objects, my parents did the same, into the home that will allow demonic entities to come into the home, and they victimize the most innocent and the most pure, which are your children. And so, again, we gotta be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, and take the occultic objects, and just like in the Old Testament, what do? They burn them. They burned them in Paul's day. They burned the occultic witchcraft books. I forgot, it was like $2 million worth of stuff that they recovered in one city and burned it all, because Paul said, this is all demonic. Burn these books.
I just had a flashback. When we first moved to Miami Beach, when my parents first moved, because I was here first, we lived in a hotel in front of the ocean. And I remember after a strong northeasterly, my father found a jar with a doll inside and some pins and some red blood or whatever it was. And I've seen it. I remember he brought it into the house. My father never had a broken bone in his life. Only a few days later, he broke his ankle. He slipped and fell, and my mom took it back out and she buried it in the sand.
Yeah, that's clear.
But I remember it was a little doll like that. It was probably 1973, 74.
Mm-hmm. So, voodoo is big in Miami. People practice voodoo, down here. And so that's some voodoo doll washed ashore, somebody put in the water to put a curse on somebody, and by you, dad picking it up and bringing it in the house, the curse got to come in the house. Even though he wasn't the target of the voodoo curse, he brought the demons who were the cursing spirit beings. They didn't care. It's like, we're getting whoever lets us in, that's the target. So again,
And with some papers, they had pins inside this little dog with papers.
Yeah. So what the takeaway is, occultic objects carry with them the power of the fallen angels that we are at war with. The principalities of the air can come along with these objects. So dressing up like a demon, buying a costume with devil horns and a devil tail, is that a good thing, or is that something that's going to open the door to the occult coming into your lives, your home, and the lives of your children? Something we have to think about. And so, as we approach October 31st, we can take the knowledge we have here tonight, which comes from the Word of God, and share it with our friends, and alert them to the dangers of participating in what is really an ancient Babylonian Druidic human blood sacrifice that lends power to the demons of the air and the fallen angels that are at war with the human race and hoping and seeking to destroy us. So,
And I'm also seeing the proliferation of tattoos, more and more tattoos on people.
a lot of tattoos. So that's where we're at. And so with that then, Steve, go ahead and shut off and we'll see you guys in a week.
Finally, this chair.